Some campgrounds feel wrong only after something happens. This one felt finished before anyone understood why. Every sign was already there. The warm fire ring, the empty permit, the bent trail sign, the road that stayed almost the same, the campsite that looked too safe. None of them looked dangerous at first. That was the mistake. Tonight, these are 7 camping horror stories about the signs people ignored because each one still had a normal explanation. Comment the time where you're watching from and whether you would have stayed after the first sign. The first thing wrong with that campsite was the fire ring. I did not understand that at the time. I noticed it the same way you notice a scratch on a rental car or a light left on in an empty bathroom. Strange enough to look at for a second, but not strange enough to make 2 grown men turn around before sunset. Matt and I pulled into the campground a little before 5. It was late October, cold enough that the air already had that metallic bite to it, but not cold enough to scare off everyone. That was why we had picked the place. It sat about 12 miles off the highway down a gravel road, with no cell service except for one weak bar near the entrance sign. The campground had maybe 20 sites under tall pines, with old picnic tables, rusted bear boxes, and fire rings made from blackened steel. We chose Site 12 because it was flat and close to the road. That mattered to me. I liked remote camping, but I also liked being able to throw everything into the truck and leave if weather turned bad. Matt parked with the hood facing out another habit we had picked up after years of camping together. Nothing felt dangerous. The site looked ordinary. Quiet, a little neglected, but ordinary. Then I walked over to the fire ring. At first, I only noticed how clean it was. Most campground fire rings are messy in a specific way. Half-burned cans, melted foil, damp cardboard, someone's bottle cap sitting in the ash because they were too lazy to pick it out. This one had none of that. The ash had been brushed into a thin gray circle around the inside edge, almost too worthily, like someone had smoothed it flat. I crouched beside it and held my hand over the center. There was still warmth coming off it. Not heat, not smoke, just a faint warmth trapped low into the metal, the way a stove burner feels after someone turns it off and walks away. I told Matt, and he glanced over from the truck bed where he was pulling out the tent poles. "Probably somebody left this morning," he said. "That made sense. Campers leave early, rangers clean sites. Ash holds heat longer than you think." I had used all those explanations before, and every one of them sounded reasonable enough. Still, I looked around the site again. There were no fresh boot prints in the dirt around the ring, no tire marks near the picnic table besides ours, no scraps of food, no beer tabs, no wet napkins twisted into the weeds. Even the bear box was empty, not just mostly empty, but wiped clean inside, as if nobody had used it all season. Matt asked if I was going to help with the tent, or keep inspecting ashes like a park employee. I laughed, because I wanted the laugh to make it normal. Then I stood up, brushed my hands on my jeans, and walked back to the truck. Before I turned away, I looked once more at the fire ring. The ash did not look abandoned. It looked reset. Matt was halfway through staking the tent when I went back to the truck for the sleeping bags. I remember that clearly because he was swearing at one of the aluminum stakes. The ground was too hard near the picnic table, and every hit from the rubber mallet made that hollow sound that carries too far in an empty campground. I grabbed the bags, the cooler, and one of the 2 bundles of firewood we had bought at a gas station about 20 minutes before the turnoff. The wood was wrapped in orange plastic mesh with a paper label stapled around it. Nothing special, just overpriced campground wood, the kind that always looks drier than it actually is. When I came back around the truck, there was already wood stacked beside the fire ring. Not a lot. Maybe 6 or 7 split pieces arranged in a neat little pile, bark side down, cut ends facing the same direction, the way someone stacks wood when they are trying to keep a fire area clean. For a second I thought Matt had done it. Then I remembered he was still behind me fighting with the tent. I asked him if he had moved any of the wood. He looked over without standing up and said, "What wood?" That should have been enough to make us stop. I know that now. But in the moment, it did not feel like proof of anything. It felt like one of those small camping mix-ups that only become strange because you are tired and cold and already paying too much attention to everything. Matt said maybe the last campers had left it. I said the same thing because I wanted that to be true. People leave firewood all the time. They leave half-burned logs, cheap camp chairs, empty propane cans, whole bags of trash they are too lazy to haul out. A neat stack of unused wood was not impossible. Then I noticed the orange plastic. One strip of it was still caught under the bottom log, twisted tight, like it had been cut off in a hurry. It was the same color as the wrap around our bundle, same thin plastic, same little white paper fibers from the label stuck to one side. I walked back to the truck and checked the bed. One bundle was still there unopened. The other one was torn open with a few pieces missing. I stood there longer than I needed to. I kept looking between the truck bed and the fire ring, trying to find the normal version of what I was seeing. Matt came up beside me and said maybe I had opened it without thinking. Maybe I had carried some over first and forgot. He was not mocking me. He sounded like he needed me to agree with him. So I did. We were not going to pack everything back into the truck over a pile of wood. The road in was narrow and rutted, and the light was already draining out of the trees. There was still no one around. No footsteps, no engine, no voice from another site. Just our tent half raised, our cooler on the table, and that clean fire ring waiting in the middle of the camp. I told Matt we should just use the wood and get through the night. He nodded too quickly. The first match caught before it even touched the kindling. The flame rolled across the split pieces like it had been looking for a way in. That should have felt lucky. It did not. By the time the fire settled, neither of us was talking much. That was normal for us on the first night of a trip. Matt usually got quiet after driving all afternoon, and I usually did too. We sat on opposite sides of the fire ring with our jackets zipped up, eating sandwiches straight out of the cooler because neither of us felt like cooking. The woods around the site were dark by then, but not in a dramatic way. Just regular campground dark. Pine trunks, cold air, the shape of the truck behind us, the tent sitting a little too new and clean under the trees. I kept looking at the wood beside the fire ring. I told myself it was because of the orange cord. That was all. I was irritated that I could not remember opening the bundle. I was embarrassed that something so small had gotten under my skin. So I picked up one of the unburned pieces, took out my pocket knife, and started shaving curls from the edge of it. It was something my dad used to do when I was a kid, not because it helped much, more because it gave your hands something to do. Matt watched me for a second and said, "You're going to cut yourself doing that in the dark." I told him I was fine. I remember this clearly because I nicked the wood with the tip of the blade and made a crooked little scratch near the end. Then for no real reason I carved my initials into the flat side. I did it fast and badly. 2 letters. The second one had a long tail because the knife slipped. Matt laughed and said, "Leaving your mark." I said, "Yeah, for the next guy who gets our haunted firewood." He did not laugh as much at that. A few minutes later, Matt stood up and walked to the truck to get the water jug. I stayed by the fire and turned the carved piece in my hand, watching the initials darken as smoke moved over them. Then I heard the truck door open. I heard Matt shifting things around in the back seat. Nothing else. No footsteps in the trees. No branch snapping. No voice. That was why what happened next bothered me so much. I looked down at the stack of wood that had not been burned yet, and another piece was lying on top. It had my initials carved into it. At first, my brain refused to take it in. I thought I was still holding the piece I had carved, and maybe I had set it down without noticing, but I had not. It was still in my left hand. I could feel the rough edge under my thumb. I could see the fresh, pale cuts I had just made. The one on the stack was older. The cuts were darker. Dirt had settled inside the grooves. The letters were the same size as mine, same angle, same ugly second letter, with the tail dragged too far down because the blade had slipped. It was not just the same initials, it was the same mistake. Matt came back with the water jug and saw my face before he saw the wood. I did not say anything. I just held up the piece in my hand, then pointed to the one on the stack. He crouched beside it. He did not touch it right away. That scared me more than if he had made a joke. Matt always had a joke ready when something made him uncomfortable. This time he just stared. Finally he said, "Put the fire out." That was it. We did not debate it. We did not check the tree line. We did not walk around the campsite with flashlights trying to prove something was there. There was nothing to prove anymore. Whatever the explanation was, it was not something we were going to solve by standing in the dark next to a fire ring that should not have been warm when we arrived. Matt dumped water over the flames. Steam rolled up hard enough to make both of us step back. Under the wet ash, I saw darker layers packed beneath the fresh coals, like the ring had been burned and cleaned and burned again in the same exact shape. That was when I stopped thinking someone had been at our campsite before us. I started thinking the place had already been through us once. We moved fast after that, not panicked, not screaming, just fast in the quiet way people move when they have both agreed not to talk about what just happened. Matt threw the water jug into the back of the truck without closing the cap. I grabbed the cooler, the sleeping bags, and the small duffel with our clothes in it. We left the tent half collapsed on the ground because the poles had jammed and neither of us wanted to stand there long enough to fix them. The fire ring hissed behind us. I remember looking back once while Matt started the truck. The steam was still coming off the ash, but the shape of the ring looked wrong in the headlights. Too clean, too round, like the water had not ruined anything, like the whole thing had simply gone back to waiting. The campground road felt longer on the way out. We passed 3 empty sites, then the old vault toilet, then the wooden post with the faded arrow pointing toward the entrance. Matt drove slower than I wanted him to because the gravel was loose and the turns were narrow. I kept checking the side mirror, expecting to see headlights behind us. There were none. That almost made it worse. If someone had been following us, at least there would have been a shape to put the fear onto. When we reached the entrance board, Matt stopped. I asked him what he was doing. He said, "I want to make sure this is the right road." That annoyed me for about half a second. Then I remembered the fork near the Ranger access road. One way led back toward the highway. The other looped deeper into the campground. So, I leaned forward and shined my flashlight through the windshield at the posted map. That was when I saw the notice. It had not been there when we checked in. I know that because I had stood in front of that same board with the self-pay envelope in my hand. The notice was pinned crookedly under the glass with one silver thumbtack. It was a plain sheet of white paper with black block letters across the top. Site 12 closed due to fire damage. Do not occupy. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Matt whispered, "That's tomorrow." The date printed underneath the warning was for the next day, not the day before. Not some old maintenance notice left up by accident. The next day. I stepped out of the truck, even though every part of me wanted to stay inside. I needed to see it closer. I needed one normal detail, a typo, a smudge, anything. But the date was clear. So was the site number. Then I saw our license plate written in pencil at the bottom corner. Matt shouted my name from the driver's seat. I got back in without taking the notice. I did take a picture. My hand was shaking badly enough that the first one blurred, so I took another. Then Matt put the truck in gear and did not stop again until we reached the highway. The next morning, I called the Ranger District from a gas station parking lot. A woman answered. I told her we had left Site 12 during the night because of a strange notice on the entrance board. I did not mention the wood. I did not mention the initials. I just said the site might have been closed. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she told me that Campground was still under seasonal maintenance and should not have had anyone checked in at all. I asked about fire damage. Another pause. Then she said, "Did you use the fire ring?" I did not answer right away. I looked over at Matt, who was sitting on the curb outside the gas station with his coffee untouched between his shoes. I still have the photo of that notice. The date is clear. The plate number is clear. But the part I keep zooming in on is the bottom edge of the paper. There is ash on it. Not dirt, not printer dust, ash. like someone had pulled it out of a fire before pinning it to the board. The permit was already missing when I got there. At the time, I thought that was the mistake, just a little campground mistake. The kind that happens near the end of the season when the ranger station closes early. Half the sites are empty and everybody is already acting like the park has shut down, even though the gates are still open. I pulled into the state park a little after 5. The sky had that flat gray color it gets in the mountains before the sun actually drops. Not dark yet, but close enough that you start thinking about headlights, firewood, and whether you pack the warmer sleeping bag. I was only staying one night. I had booked the site online the night before because I needed to get out of town for a while, and the confirmation email was still open on my phone when I parked beside the closed ranger window. There was a wooden self-check-in box mounted outside the office. I had used those before. You find your envelope, tear off the permit, clip it to the campsite post, and leave the receipt on your dashboard if the park asks for it. Simple. The kind of system that makes you feel like everything is official, even when there is no one around to ask. The envelopes were arranged alphabetically in a metal rack behind a scratched plastic cover. Most of them were empty slots. A few had names written in black marker. Mine was there. My last name was written across the front. Under it was the site number 18 and the correct arrival date. Whoever wrote it had even added my license plate in small block letters near the bottom. That should have made me feel better. I opened the envelope. There was nothing inside. No permit tag, no receipt, no little campground map. Just the thin paper envelope with my name on it and a flap that had already been bent back like someone else had opened it first. I stood there for a few seconds holding it under the weak porch light outside the ranger station. Then I checked the rack again, thinking maybe the permit had slipped behind another envelope. It had not. I checked the ground beneath the box. Nothing. For a minute I considered leaving. Then I did what most people would do when nothing was clearly wrong yet. I made it reasonable. Maybe the ranger forgot to put the tag in. Maybe they had switched to posting permits directly at the sites. Maybe someone had taken the wrong one by accident. I had the confirmation email. I had paid. The campground was not full. It felt annoying, not dangerous. The only thing that bothered me was the envelope itself. It looked older than it should have. There was a dry mud smear across one corner, and the fold on the flap was soft, like it had been opened and closed more than once. Not torn, not damaged. Used. I put it back in the rack because I did not know what else to do. Then I got in my SUV and drove towards Site 18, telling myself I would sort it out in the morning. But even then, before I saw the permit, before I understood anything, I remember looking once in the rearview mirror. The empty envelope was still hanging there under the porch light, and it did not feel forgotten. It felt waiting. Site 18 was near the back of the campground. That was one of the reasons I had picked it. On the reservation map, it looked private without being too far from the main road. There was a restroom building maybe 200 yards away, a water spigot near the bend, and enough distance from the other loops that I would not have to listen to generators all night. Most of the sites I passed were empty. A few had old reservation tags hanging from their posts, sun-faded and curled at the corners. One RV sat near the entrance with its blinds closed and a blue cooler under the picnic table. Other than that, the campground felt like it was already done for the year. Not abandoned, just tired, like everyone had agreed the season was over, except the booking website. I found Site 18 at the end of a short gravel spur. The first thing I noticed was the permit tag. It was clipped inside a cloudy plastic sleeve on the wooden post exactly where it was supposed to be. For a second, I actually laughed at myself. That made sense. The ranger had probably posted it earlier and left the empty envelope as a marker. Annoying, but not strange. I parked, shut off the SUV, and walked over to check it. My name was on it. So was my license plate. Same plate, same site number, same arrival date. Even the number of nights was right. That should have ended the whole thing, but the permit looked wrong. The paper had gone soft at the edges, like it had been damp and dried more than once. The top half was faded not badly, but enough that the black ink looked more gray than black. A thin line of dried water sat inside the bottom of the plastic sleeve. The kind of stain you get when something has been outside through weather. I told myself the sleeve was old, not the permit. That was the only version of the night I could stay in. I unloaded quickly. Tent first, sleeping bag, cooler, small lantern. I kept the SUV close enough that I could reach the driver's door in a few steps, not because I was scared yet, but because it was cold and I did not want to spread my gear around. The site itself was ordinary. Flat tent pad, metal fire ring, picnic table with knife marks in the wood, a few pine needles collected against the bear box. Normal things helped. I made dinner from a foil packet and ate it standing up near the table, checking my phone every few minutes. I had one bar if I held it near the corner of the site closest to the road. Enough to make me feel connected. Not enough to load anything. Before it got fully dark, I walked back to the post and looked at the permit again. There was no reason to, I knew that, but I wanted the paper to look newer the second time. I wanted the fading to be from the plastic. I wanted the damp line to be on the sleeve and not the permit itself. It was not. The stain crossed the paper too. At the lower corner just under my license plate, there was a small brown mark shaped like a thumbprint. It did not look fresh. It looked pressed into the fibers. I almost took the permit down right then. Then I stopped myself. Taking it felt like making the problem real. Leaving it alone let me pretend this was just park paperwork and bad timing. So I walked back to the picnic table, turned on the lantern, and tried to settle in. Behind me, the permit sleeve tapped once against the post. There was no wind. I tried to ignore the sound after that. It only happened once. One clean tap of plastic against wood. If I had been home, I would not have noticed it. If there had been wind, I would have blamed the wind. But the air was still enough that the smoke from my little stove rose straight up before spreading under the branches. I ate fast and cleaned up faster. By then, the campground had gone quiet in that late-season way that feels almost polite. No kids yelling, no doors slamming, no music from an RRV 2 loops over. Just the weak buzz of the restroom light in the distance, and the occasional click from the cooling engine of my SUV. I took a picture of the permit before crawling into the tent. That was the practical part of my brain taking over. If a ranger came by in the morning and asked why I was there, I wanted proof. My name was on the tag. My plate was on it. I had not just chosen an empty site and helped myself. The flash went off. That was when I saw the line at the bottom. It was printed smaller than the rest of the text, almost hidden under the curve of the plastic sleeve. I had missed it twice because the paper was faded and the sleeve was fogged. Return/not cleared. I stared at it for a while. I did not know what it meant. Maybe it was some park code. Maybe it meant the permit had been printed but not checked by staff. Maybe it had nothing to do with me at all. That was what I kept doing that night. I kept building little explanations and standing inside them as long as they held. Then I noticed the pencil mark. It was written just under the departure date in small letters pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Left early. I had not left. I had not even decided to leave. For a few seconds, I just stood there with my phone in my hand, looking from the permit to my tent and back again. The site looked normal behind me. Lantern on the picnic table, sleeping bag inside the tent, cooler latched. SUV parked where I could see it. That was the worst part. Nothing around me had changed. Only the paperwork had. I called the ranger office number posted on the campground board. It went to voicemail after 4 rings. I left a message that sounded calmer than I felt. I said my envelope had been empty, that a permit was already posted at Site 18, and that I wanted to make sure there had not been a mistake. I did not mention the words written in pencil. Saying them out loud felt like giving them permission to be real. After the call, I moved my sleeping bag into the back of the SUV. I told myself I was just being cautious. The road out of the park was narrow, dark, and full of switchbacks. I had driven 4 hours to get there and was tired enough that leaving immediately felt dangerous in a different way. Sleeping in the locked vehicle until morning made sense. That was the decision I could defend. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the same tapping sound. Plastic on wood. I lay still in the back of the SUV, breathing through my nose, staring at the dark outline of the driver's seat. The windows were fogged from the inside. For a moment, I thought it might be rain starting, but there was no sound on the roof. Tap. I reached for my flashlight and aimed it through the rear window toward the sight post. The permit was still there, moving slightly, even though the air outside looked dead still. And behind the plastic sleeve folded neatly against the wood was the envelope from the ranger station. The same empty envelope. I could see my last name written across it in black marker. I had left it in the rack outside the office. I remembered doing that. I remembered the porch light over the box and the empty slot where I pushed it back into place. Now it was at my campsite, tucked behind the permit like it had always belonged there. I did not get out of the SUV again that night. I left as soon as there was enough light to see the road. I did not pack like a normal camper. I shoved the sleeping bag behind the driver's seat, threw the tent in wet and half folded, and left the little lantern on the picnic table, because I could not make myself walk back to the sight post more than once. The permit was still there. So was the envelope tucked behind the sleeve with my name facing outward. Before I left, I took 3 more pictures. One of the permit, one of the envelope, one of both, together with the site number visible on the wooden post. I remember doing that because I wanted proof for someone else, but also for myself. I had slept badly in the SUV, waking every 20 minutes to check that the doors were still locked. By morning, part of me had already started trying to soften the whole thing into a mistake. Paperwork, a prank, exhaustion, anything but what it felt like. The ranger station opened at 8. I was parked outside by 7:45. A woman unlocked the front door a few minutes early after seeing me standing there with my phone in my hand. She looked tired, in the ordinary way park employees look tired near the end of a season. Coffee cup, fleece vest, radio clipped to her shoulder. Nothing about her seemed strange, which helped more than I expected. I explained it as simply as I could. My envelope had been empty. The permit was already posted at Site 18. There were notes on it that I did not understand. I showed her the confirmation email first because that was the normal part. That was the part I wanted her to fix. She typed the confirmation number into her computer. Then she typed it again. Her face changed a little, not enough to scare me by itself, but enough that I stopped talking. She said, "This reservation number is not for this campground." I thought I had misunderstood her. She turned the monitor slightly and showed me the screen. The confirmation number belonged to another park in the same state system, a campground more than 70 miles away. Same arrival date, same number of nights, different county, different site. I told her that was impossible. My email said this park. I opened it again. It still did. She looked from my phone to her monitor, then back to my phone. For a second, she seemed more annoyed than afraid, like she thought the booking system was making her morning worse. Then I showed her the pictures from Site 18. My name, my plate, the permit sleeve, the envelope behind it. She did not say anything for a while. Finally, she picked up a clipboard and asked me to show her the site. We drove separately. I followed her parked truck back through the campground, past the closed lake road and the restroom building with the buzzing lights still on. In daylight, everything looked smaller, less dramatic. That made me feel foolish until we reached Site 18. The permit was still on the post, but it had changed. The departure date had been crossed out in pencil. Under it, someone had written a new line in the same small, hard-pressed handwriting. Cleared before arrival. The ranger stood very still. I asked her if that was some kind of staff note. She did not answer right away. She unclipped the sleeve, removed the permit and envelope together, and slid them into the back of her clipboard, like she did not want to touch the paper longer than necessary. Then she said, "You should not have been assigned this site." That was all she would say. I asked if I needed to file a report. She told me she would make a note in the system. I asked if anyone had been messing with the check-in board. She said they would look into it. Her voice had gone flat by then, professional and closed. I knew that tone. It meant the conversation was over. I drove home before noon. 3 days later, I got the refund email. The subject line said my campground fee had been returned because the guest had left before check-in. I read that sentence at least 10 times. Then I looked at the processing time. 4:12 p.m. That was more than an hour before I pulled into the park. That is the part I still cannot explain. Not the empty envelope, not the old permit, not even the note behind the sleeve. The park did not lose my reservation. It had already finished with it before I arrived. The sign was already bent when we found it. I wish I could say I noticed that first. I wish I could say something about it bothered me right away. But the truth is, it looked like ordinary trail damage, the kind you see all the time in older campgrounds where nobody fixes anything until the season gets busy again. Kelly and I had driven up on a Friday afternoon because the campground was cheap and quiet. That was the whole reason. No big trip, no serious hiking plan. Just one night away from work, bad cell service, and the kind of silence you think you want until you actually get it. We reached the campground a little after 4. There were maybe 6 sites total on our loop. 2 had old reservation tags clipped to the posts. 1 had a folding chair sitting beside a cold fire ring, but no car, no tent, and no cooler. I remember Kelly pointing at it and saying someone probably packed in a hurry because of the weather. The sky was low and gray and the air smelled like wet pine needles. Our site was close to the trailhead. That was why I had picked it online. The park website showed a short loop behind the campground called Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles, easy grade. It looked like the kind of trail you could walk in the morning with coffee still in your system and be back before checkout. There was a printed map inside the little campground board near the restroom. The paper was warped from moisture, but the trail was there marked with a thin dotted line that curved behind the sites and came back near the creek. Kelly took a picture of it because neither of us expected to have service. Nothing about it felt unsafe. We had water, we had flashlights. My phone was fully charged. The trail was short. The campground road was close enough that we could hear one truck pass near the entrance while we unloaded. It all felt ordinary in the way small state park campgrounds feel ordinary. A little worn down, a little too quiet, but still managed, still mapped. We walked to the trailhead before setting up the tent, mostly to see where it started. The wooden sign stood between 2 cedar trees at the edge of the site loop. It was waist-high, dark from rain, with carved letters painted white. Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles. The right side of the sign was bent inward toward the trees. Not broken off, not split through, just curved like pressure had been applied slowly from the campground side until the wood gave in and stayed that way. I touched the edge of it with my thumb. It was damp and cold. Kelly said, probably snow damage. I agreed because that made sense. Snow deadfall, old wood, bad maintenance. There were a dozen normal reasons a trail sign could look like that. But there was no fallen branch nearby, no scrape mark on the post, no disturbed dirt around the base, no fresh crack where the wood should have snapped. The bend was smooth, clean. It looked less broken than pulled. We did not hike it that evening. That part matters to me now. We saw the bent sign before dinner, talked about walking the loop in the morning, and then went back to the campsite like nothing unusual had happened. If the sign was a warning, we had almost 14 hours to listen to it. Instead, we made ramen on the camp stove, drank bad instant coffee, and joked about how every campground map in America looks like it was printed in 1997. By morning, the sky had cleared a little. The air was still cold enough that our breath showed when we packed the small day bag. 2 water bottles, a granola bar, my pocket knife. Kelly brought the flashlight even though it was daylight because she was the kind of person who always packed one extra thing. I remember teasing her for it. She told me I would thank her later. We reached the trailhead around 8:30. The sign was still there, bent inward between the cedars. In the daylight, it looked less strange, more like old damage. That was one thing I learned that weekend. Some things only look wrong in the right light. Change the light, and your brain starts forgiving them. The trail began normally, packed dirt, wet pine needles, a few blue markers nailed to trees at uneven heights. Laurel Creek ran somewhere to our left, not visible most of the time, but close enough that we could hear water moving over rocks. Behind us, the campground made soft morning sounds. A truck door closing, someone coughing near an RV, a dog barking once and then stopping. For the first 20 minutes, it was exactly the trail the map promised. Easy grade, no real junctions, no steep drop-offs. Kelly walked ahead of me, stopping once to take a picture of a shelf mushroom growing out of a dead stump. I remember thinking we had been dramatic about the sign. I even remember planning to tell her that when we got back, but not wanting to admit I had been bothered too. Then the trail curved away from the creek. The sound of the water faded. The trees got closer. Not thick enough to feel dangerous, just enough that the campground sounds disappeared behind us. Kelly slowed down and checked the picture of the map on her phone. "We should loop back soon," she said. A few minutes later, we saw another sign ahead. At first, I felt relieved. I thought it was a junction marker, or one of those little reassurance signs parks put halfway through a trail, so people know they are still going the right way. It stood on the left side of the path, between two cedars, waist-high, dark from rain. Then we got closer. Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles. The right side was bent inward. Kelly stopped before I did. I remember her saying very quietly, "That's weird." I said what I needed to say to keep the morning normal. Maybe the park used the same signs at both ends of the loop. Maybe there was another entrance from the far side. Maybe we had walked faster than we thought and were already near the return point. None of those explanations was impossible, but the crack near the left edge was the same. A thin pale line cutting through the paint, below the word loop. The bend was the same angle too, not just similar. Same curve, same smooth pull inward toward the trees. Kelly looked back down the trail. "Let's just turn around," she said. I agreed right away. That is another part I remember clearly. Neither of us wanted to prove anything. Neither of us wanted to be brave. We turned around before either of us said the word lost. The trail looked different on the way back. Not completely different. That would have been easier to react to. If the trees had changed all at once or the path had vanished, we probably would have stopped pretending. But it was small things. The kind of things you notice and then immediately argue with yourself about. The creek was on the wrong side. I told myself that could happen on a loop trail. Water bends. Trails curve. A sound can bounce strangely through trees. But I had been listening to Laurel Creek on our left for most of the walk out. And now the sound was faintly to our right, hidden somewhere below the slope. Kelly noticed it too. She did not say anything at first. She just kept checking her phone, not for service, but for the picture of the map. Every time the screen lit her face, she looked more irritated than scared. I think irritation was safer for both of us. It made the problem feel like bad signage instead of something we did not have a name for. After 10 minutes, we should have reached the first sign. We did not. After 15, we found it again. Same two cedars, same dark wet wood, same white letters. Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles. The right side bent inward smooth and clean, as if something had pulled it from the trees and then let go. I stopped in front of it longer than I should have. Kelly said, "Don't." I asked, "Don't what?" She said, "Whatever you're thinking." I was thinking that we needed to know if it was the same sign. Not because I wanted to solve anything. I just needed one fixed point. One thing that stayed where it was supposed to stay. So, I took out my pocket knife and stepped behind the post. The back of the sign was plain dark damp wood. I carved a small X into the lower right corner. It took maybe 3 seconds. The blade slipped at the end and made the bottom line longer than the top. I remember that because Kelly snapped at me to hurry up, and I almost cut my thumb pulling the knife away. "There," I said. "If we see it again, we know." Kelly did not answer. We kept walking back the way we were sure we had come. This time we stayed close together. Neither of us tried to make conversation. The trail was quiet in a way that felt pressed down. No birds, no campground sounds, just our shoes on wet dirt and the creek somewhere it should not have been. Then we saw the sign again. I stopped before Kelly did. It stood ahead of us on the left side of the trail between two cedars. Same height, same bend, same thin crack under the word loop. Kelly whispered, "No." I walked around behind it because part of me still needed the trail to be stupid instead of impossible. The X was there, lower right corner, same slipped bottom line, fresh pale wood showing through the damp surface. I touched it with my thumb. The cut was clean, new, mine. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then Kelly said, "We're not following the trail anymore." That was the first smart thing either of us had said all morning. I checked my phone. No signal. The compass app opened, spun once, pointed north, then slowly rotated until it pointed back the way we had just come. I closed it before Kelly could see how badly my hands were shaking. We did not run. Running would have been a good way to break an ankle or lose the path completely. Instead, we left the trail at the widest spot we could find and moved toward the sound of the creek. The idea was simple enough to believe in. The campground map showed Laurel Creek near the service road. If we could reach the water and follow it downhill, we might find the road without trusting the signs again. I looked back once. The bent sign was still visible through the trees. For a moment, I thought the X was facing us. Then the branches shifted, and I told myself I had seen it wrong. Leaving the trail felt wrong the second we did it. Not because it was a bad decision. It was probably the only good one left. But there is something about stepping off a marked path that makes you feel like you have admitted the situation is real. A minute earlier, we were two people on a confusing campground loop. Once we moved between the trees, pushing through wet ferns and low branches, we became two people trying to get out. Kelly led because she could hear the creek better than I could. She kept one hand out in front of her and the other wrapped around the flashlight, even though it was still morning. I followed close enough that I could see the heel marks from her boots in the mud. Every few steps I looked back, not because I expected to see anything, but because I could not stand the idea of the bent sign moving closer without us knowing. The creek was farther away than it sounded. We slid down a short bank, crossed a patch of soft ground, and finally reached a narrow run of water moving over black stones. It was not deep, maybe ankle high, but seeing it helped. Water obeyed gravity. Water went somewhere. A creek felt more honest than a trail sign. We followed it downhill. The woods opened a little after that. Not enough to show us the campground, but enough that the trees stopped pressing so close. The ground became flatter, and after another 10 minutes, I saw two tire tracks cut through the mud ahead of us. A service road, old but real. Kelly let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. I remember that sound because it was the first human thing either of us had made in a while. We climbed onto the road and stood there for a moment looking both ways. The road was overgrown in spots with grass growing through the center and pine needles hiding the edges, but it had to lead somewhere. We chose the downhill direction. About 50 yards later, my flashlight caught something pale near the ditch. At first, I thought it was a piece of trash. Then I saw the carved letters. A wooden trail sign was lying face down in the mud, half covered by leaves. One post had snapped off. The other was still attached, dark and rotten near the base. Kelly said, "Keep walking." I wanted to. I really did. But the beam had already crossed the back of the sign, and I had already seen it. A small X in the lower right corner. I did not touch it. I did not turn the sign over. I did not need to. The X was enough. Same height, same slipped bottom line, but this wood was not fresh. It was swollen from rain and dark around the cut, like the mark had been there for a long time. Kelly grabbed my sleeve. This time I listened. We walked faster after that, not running just fast enough that branches hit our arms, and neither of us cared. The service road curved once past a rusted gate lying open in the weeds, and then without warning, the trees broke. We came out on the campground road, not near the trailhead, not near the entrance. We came out beside the restroom building, less than 200 yards from our campsite, from a direction neither of us had entered. The campground looked completely normal. A truck was parked at one of the lower sites. Smoke lifted from someone's morning fire. Somewhere a dog barked twice. That normalness made me feel worse. It felt like the world had been waiting for us to step back into the version of it everyone else could see. Kelly did not say anything until we reached our tent. Then she said, "Pack the car." I nodded. We left before lunch. We did not hike back to the trailhead. We did not take another picture of the sign. We did not stop at the entrance board to check the map again. I told myself that was because we were shaken. The truth is, I was afraid the map would still show a trail we had just proven we could not trust. I called the ranger district the next morning, not from the campground. We were already gone by then. We had driven to a diner outside a small town about 40 minutes away, the kind with laminated menus and coffee that tasted burnt no matter how much cream you used. Kelly sat across from me, still wearing her hiking jacket, both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched. I almost did not call. By daylight, with other people around and trucks passing on the road outside, the whole thing started shrinking in my head. Bad trail maintenance, panic, a confusing loop, two tired people convincing each other something was wrong. That version felt easier. It also felt like a lie. So I called. The woman who answered sounded busy. Radios in the background, keyboard clicks. I told her we had stayed at the campground and tried to hike Laurel Creek Loop. I said the signage was confusing and there might be damaged trail markers or an old service road people could accidentally follow. She was quiet after I said the trail name. Then she asked me to repeat it. Laurel Creek Loop, I said, the one behind the campground. Another pause. She told me Laurel Creek Loop had been closed for almost 2 years after a washout damaged part of the slope. The official trailhead had been blocked. The signs had been removed. The updated campground map no longer listed it. I looked at Kelly. She must have understood from my face because she closed her eyes and leaned back in the booth. I told the ranger there had been a sign at the trailhead. I described it without meaning to. Waist high, dark wood, white letters, bent inward on the right side. The ranger said, "There should not be any sign there. Not there should not have been. There should not be." That small difference stayed with me. When I checked the park website later, the official PDF map did not show Laurel Creek Loop. I downloaded it twice thinking maybe the first file had loaded wrong. It had not. The trail was gone. Just blank forest behind the campground, with the creek marked farther north than I remembered. The picture Kelly had taken of the campground board was still on her phone. That version had the trail, a thin dotted line leaving behind our site, curving through the trees and coming back near the creek. Printed right there on the warped paper, clear enough to read. 2 weeks later, I drove back alone. I do not know why. I told myself I wanted a normal explanation. Maybe the old sign had been removed after we reported it. Maybe the map board had been replaced. Maybe I needed to see that place in daylight without fear sitting behind my eyes. The trailhead was still where I remembered it, but the sign was gone. There were only 2 dark holes in the ground between the cedar trees filled with rainwater and pine needles. No post, no carved letters, no bent wood, nothing to photograph except absence. I did not walk in. I stood there for less than a minute, then went back to the car. That night, while unpacking, I found a small piece of wood in the front pocket of my hiking jacket. It was about the size of 2 fingers, damp at one end, splintered along the side. On the front were 3 carved letters, white paint still caught inside them. LOO, part of the word loop. I turned it over even though I already knew what I would find. A small X had been carved into the back, lower right corner. Bottom line dragged too far down where the blade had slipped. I do not know if it came from the sign we marked to the sign we found on the service road, or a sign that was never supposed to be there at all. The road did not feel wrong at first. That was the problem. If it had been washed out, blocked by a fallen tree, or marked with some warning sign, Ryan and I probably would have turned around before sunset. But it looked like every Forest Service road we had ever taken into the mountains. Gravel, potholes, low branches scraping the passenger side, pine trees packed close enough to make the light feel thinner than it was. We were looking for a dispersed campsite. Nothing fancy, just a flat pullout where we could sleep in the back of the truck, make coffee in the morning, and fish the creek before driving home. We had done that kind of trip before. Ryan had the offline map downloaded. I had a full tank of spare tire and 2 gas station sandwiches wrapped in paper on the center console. We were not lost. We were not unprepared. We were just trying to get away from people for one night. The road started about 6 miles off the highway. There was no gate, just a brown Forest Service marker with numbers on it, and a faded sign reminding people to pack out trash. The first few pullouts were too close to the main road. The next one had a fire ring, but the ground sloped toward the ditch. Ryan said we should keep going while we still had light. That made sense. It was not fully dark yet. The sky between the trees was turning that dull blue color, but the headlights were not doing all the work. We had maybe 40 minutes before it got hard to judge the ground. Enough time to find something better. About 10 minutes in, we saw the grocery bag. It was tied to a low branch on the right side of the road, maybe shoulder height if someone were standing there. White plastic. The cheap kind with red lettering from a store I did not recognize. It moved a little as we passed, even though the air outside looked still. Ryan pointed at it and said trash marker. I asked what that meant. He said hunters or campers sometimes tied stuff to branches so they could find a turnoff again. I had seen flagging tape before, but never a grocery bag. Still, it was not strange enough to stop for. People leave dumb things in the woods all the time. A few minutes later, we reached a fallen tree. Someone had already cut through the trunk, leaving 2 clean ends on either side of the road. The gap was just wide enough for the truck. Ryan leaned forward as we passed and said, "Remember that. If we have to come back in the dark, that's our landmark." I remember looking at the odometer trip, 3.8 miles from the highway. I remember because Ryan joked that if we could not find a site by mile 5, we were sleeping in the truck, wherever it was flat. We passed one more pullout, but it was too muddy. Then the road bent downhill and disappeared between darker trees. There was nothing scary about the bag, not until we saw it again. We drove another 15 minutes before Ryan saw it. At first, he did not say anything. He just leaned forward, one hand on the dashboard, looking past the headlights like he was trying to make the road into something else. Then he said, "Is that another bag?" I slowed down. A white grocery bag hung from a branch on the right side of the road. Same height, same loose knot, same cheap red lettering stretched across the plastic. It moved once as our headlights reached it, a small twist like it had been waiting for the light before deciding what to do. I told myself it was not the same one. That was easy enough at first. People leave trash everywhere. Hunters mark routes. Kids tie stupid things to branches. There could be 10 white bags along that road, and it would still be a litter problem, not a horror story. Ryan said maybe somebody marked the good spots. I nodded because that gave us both something normal to hold on to. The pullout beyond it was no good. Too narrow with a ditch on one side and a slope on the other. We kept going. The offline map still showed us moving deeper along the same forest road. No loops, no major turns, no side road worth noticing. The blue dot lagged behind now and then, but that was normal under tree cover. Then we reached the fallen tree again. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The trunk had been cut in 2 just like before. Same clean ends on either side of the road. Same strip of bark peeled back on the left half. Same narrow gap barely wide enough for the truck. Ryan said, maybe there's more than one. His voice sounded like he did not believe it. I wanted to believe it for him. Logging roads get cleared the same way. Storms knock down trees all over. A cut tree on a forest road is not rare, but the peeled bark was in the same place, and the right half of the trunk had the same dark knot shaped like an eye. I checked the odometer trip. 6.9 miles? That helped. A little. The truck said we had gone farther. Numbers were clean. Numbers did not care how nervous we were. If the first tree had been at 3.8, this could not be the same tree unless the road had somehow folded back without turning. Ryan said we should head out. I did not argue. There was still enough light to see the edge of the road, but not much. The trees had gone from green to black. The safest choice was to turn around while the road was wide enough. I pulled into the next muddy turnout, backed up twice, and pointed the truck toward the highway. For a while, that made everything better. Leaving usually does that. It gives your brain a job. Follow the road, watch the rocks, keep the tires out of the ditch. Do the ordinary thing until the fear has less room to talk. Then we saw the wooden mile marker. It stood on the right side of the road, half rotted at the base with a single number painted in white. 4. Ryan looked at it, then at the dash. I did the same. The trip odometer read 9.2 miles. I said, "Markers get moved." Ryan said, "Yeah." Neither of us sounded convinced. We kept driving. We decided to believe the truck because the truck was the only thing in that forest still acting like distance meant something. The next stretch of road was too quiet. I know that sounds like something people say after the fact, but I mean it literally. The truck should have made more noise against the gravel. Branches should have scraped the paint. Loose rocks should have popped under the tires. Instead, the sound seemed to stay under us flat and close, like the forest was taking the rest of it before it could spread. Ryan turned off the radio, even though it had only been hissing. Neither of us said why. We passed through a muddy section where the road dipped between two banks. I slowed down because the ruts were deep, and the headlights caught our tire tracks in the wet clay. At first, that made me feel better. Tracks meant other vehicles. Tracks meant a real road. Then Ryan said, "Those are ours." I looked again. The tread pattern matched my tires. That by itself did not mean anything. Lots of trucks use similar tires. But there was a small chunk missing from my front passenger tread, a broken spot I had noticed at the gas station before the trip. It left a little gap in the pattern every rotation. That gap was in the mud. The tracks ran ahead of us in the same direction we were driving. Not behind us, ahead. I did not stop. I did not get out. I did not lean halfway through the window to check. I just kept both hands on the wheel and drove through the mud as straight as I could. Ryan locked his door. I heard the click and locked mine too. A minute later, the grocery bag appeared again. This time it was not far back from the road. It was tied to a branch so low that it brushed the passenger mirror as we passed. Ryan jerked away from the window, even though the glass was closed. The plastic dragged across it with a soft, dry sound that made my teeth press together. There was a tear near the bottom of the bag. Same tear, same red lettering, same knot twisted tight around the branch. Ryan said, "Don't stop." I said, "I'm not stopping." We kept following the road downhill, because that was the only plan that still made sense. Downhill should lead to water. Water should lead toward a larger road. Larger roads should lead out. It was the kind of logic you use when the map stops helping, but you still need rules. The mile marker came back after the next bend. 4. Same white paint. Same rust stain under the nail. Same smear of dried mud across the lower half of the post. The trip odometer read 13.6. Ryan laughed once, not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh people make when fear gets too large and has to come out as something else. I wanted to say something steady. Something like, "We are almost out," or "Roads repeat sometimes," or "Old markers get reused." But every explanation had started to sound childish, like I was trying to comfort a kid who already knew I was lying. The forest opened a little after that. Not much. Just enough that the trees pulled back and the road widened into a long, shallow curve. For the first time in nearly half an hour, I thought I heard traffic. Not clear highway noise, but something distant and constant beneath the engine. Ryan heard it too. "Keep going," he said. I did. The road dipped again, and the headlights swept across the mud along the left shoulder. Fresh tire tracks ran beside us there, close enough that for a second it looked like another vehicle had been driving parallel to the truck, just outside the beam. Same tread, Same broken gap. The tracks curved with us, then disappeared into the darkness ahead. That was the moment I stopped thinking we were accidentally driving in circles. For the first time, I wondered if we were not trying to leave the road. Maybe we were just catching up to ourselves. The road opened onto the highway without warning. 1 second we were between trees, watching gravel and mud roll under the headlights. The next, the tires hit pavement so smooth it felt unreal. I almost drove straight across both lanes because my hands had gotten used to fighting the steering wheel. Ryan grabbed the dashboard and said my name, and I corrected just in time. Neither of us told the other to stop. I kept driving until we reached a gas station 20 minutes later. It was one of those small rural places with 2 pumps, a flickering beer sign in the window, and a clerk who looked half asleep behind the counter. I parked under the brightest light I could find. Ryan got out first and walked around the truck without saying anything. There was no grocery bag on the mirror, no branch scratches that I could see, no mud on the passenger window where the plastic had dragged across it. The truck looked normal, which should have helped. It did not. Inside the gas station, Ryan bought 2 coffees and did not drink his. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open, checking the offline map on my phone. The road showed as one long line from the highway into the forest. No loop, no second road running beside it, no side route that could have brought us back to the same marker again and again. Ryan stood beside the open door and said, "The dash cam." I had forgotten it was recording. The camera saved clips in short files. Most of them were boring at first. Headlights on gravel, trees, the first white bag. The cut tree. Ryan muttering something about finding a flat spot. Then later the same bag again. The same cut tree again. The mile marker with the number 4. Watching it on a tiny screen made it worse, because the camera did not panic. It did not misremember. It just showed what had been in front of us. We found the part near the end where the road widened, and I thought I heard highway noise. The headlights swept left across a pullout. There was a truck parked there. Same color as mine, same roof rack, same cracked right taillight I had been meaning to replace for months. Same fishing sticker on the rear window half peeled at the corner. Ryan reached in and paused the video. For a few seconds we just looked at it. The license plate was unreadable because of glare and mud. I will say that because it is true. I cannot prove it was my truck. I cannot prove anything from that frame except that a truck almost exactly like mine was parked in a pullout we had no memory of passing. But the parking lights were on, dim yellow, like the battery was almost dead, and there was no one inside. Ryan backed the clip up 3 times. Each time the headlights swept over it and moved on. The other truck never flashed its lights. It never pulled out behind us. It just sat there, angled toward the road like it had been waiting for us to pass. The next file was corrupted. Only the first few seconds played. Gravel, darkness, the edge of Ryan's sleeve reflected in the window. Then the image froze. That was when I saw the grocery bag. It was not outside anymore. It was in the truck bed caught against the inside wall near the tailgate. White plastic, red lettering, same tear near the bottom. I know what people will say. Maybe it blew in at the gas station. Maybe it was trash from earlier. Maybe we picked it up without thinking, but I emptied that truck before the trip. Ryan saw me do it. There was no bag in the bed when we left home, and neither of us got out on that road. The frame froze there. White bag, truck bed, darkness behind it. Then the file cut to black. I deleted the clip once. Then I restored it from the camera card because deleting it felt too much like pretending. I still have it saved on an old hard drive, but I do not watch it anymore. The road did not trap us by closing. It trapped us by staying almost the same. And the bag was not on the road anymore. It was inside the truck. The first strange thing about the camp host was not that he knew my name. It was how relieved he looked when we arrived. Marcy and I pulled into the campground a little before 6, late enough that the lake had already turned gray behind the trees. It was a private place, not one of the big state parks with paved loops and numbered bathhouses. Just a small office, a few long-term RVs, a gravel road down to the water, and a row of tent sites tucked between wet pines. We had booked it online the night before. 2 nights, lake view, nothing special. We had both been working too much, and the idea was to sit near the water, cook something simple, and not answer messages for a weekend. I remember telling Marcy that private campgrounds were usually easier because someone was always around if something went wrong. The office porch light was already on when we parked. An older man stood beside the door in a faded reflective vest. He had one hand on the railing and the other wrapped around a paper coffee cup. There was a golf cart parked nearby with a plastic windshield and a bundle of firewood strapped to the back. Before I could get my wallet out, he smiled and said my first name. Not my last name, my first. I stopped with one foot on the porch step. He said it again like he was making sure he had the right person, then looked past me at Marcy and gave her a small nod. Not unfriendly, not strange enough to call strange yet, just familiar in a way I had not earned. I told myself he had the booking pulled up inside. Maybe he had seen our license plate. Maybe the campground was small enough that every arrival was expected by name. Those explanations worked. I wanted them to work. He opened the office door and waved us in, but did not sit at the computer. "Good," he said. "You made it before dark this time." Marcy looked at me. I said, "This time." The man blinked once, then smiled like he had used the wrong phrase. "I just mean before the fog rolls in," he said. "Gets thick down by the water after sunset." He moved on quickly after that. Too quickly maybe, but not in a way that felt threatening. He pulled a paper map from a stack, circled the office, the restroom, and the upper loop with a red pen. Our reservation was supposed to be for a lake site in the lower loop, but he tapped the map above it. "I'm going to put you up here tonight," he said. "Upper loop, site 6. I told him we had booked a lake site. "I know," he said. "Then softer lower loop isn't ideal tonight." That was reasonable enough to be annoying instead of scary. Maybe the lower sites were muddy. Maybe the fog really was bad. Maybe he was trying to save us from waking up damp and miserable. Camp hosts do that kind of thing. They get protective of their little patch of ground. Marcy did not like it. I could feel that without looking at her. But it was getting dark, the man was polite, and the upper loop was closer to the road. Arguing over a lake view suddenly felt childish. So I took the map. The host gave me the kind of look people give when they think you have finally made the right decision. He did not sound like he was warning us. He sounded like he was correcting something. We followed the golf cart up to Site 6. The campground was smaller than it looked on the website. That is not unusual with private places. Photos stretch gravel roads and make every tree look like part of some quiet wilderness experience. In person, it was just a damp little campground with a lake at the bottom, RVs tucked under pines and porch lights glowing through plastic awnings. The upper loop was better than I expected. Site 6 sat on a flat pad near the restroom building, high enough that we could see pieces of the lake through the trees. The truck fit beside the picnic table. The fire ring was clean. There was even a water spigot across the road. If the host had been trying to help us, he had done a good job. That was what made it hard to stay upset. He climbed out of the golf cart slowly and pointed his flashlight at the ground not in our faces. Then he handed me the paper map he had marked in the office. A red circle sat around Site 6. A second red line crossed out the lower loop near the water. "You'll sleep better up here," he said. Marcy was standing beside the truck with her arms folded. "Is something wrong with the lake sites?" she asked. The host looked down toward the dark slope. "Not wrong," he said, "just not ideal tonight." That was the second time he had used that word. Ideal, like he was avoiding a simpler one. I asked if there had been flooding. He shook his head. "Fog, mostly. Sound carries down there." Then he looked at me and added, "Last time you kept trying to make the lake site work." Marcy turned toward me. I said, "We've never been here." The host's face changed, but only for a second. It was not fear. It was more like embarrassment, the way someone looks when they have said something personal by accident. He tapped the map with 2 fingers and forced a small laugh. Sorry, he said. I get people mixed up by the end of the season. Then he started talking about firewood. He told us where the ice freezer was, which restroom stall had a bad latch, and how the lake road sometimes got slick after dark. Ordinary things, useful things. That helped him recover, and honestly, it helped me too. A strange sentence can lose power if enough normal sentences come after it. When he drove away, Marcy said I don't like him. I said I don't think he's dangerous. That's not what I said. I knew what she meant, but there was no clean reason to leave. The host had moved us to a safer site closer to the road. Other RVs were visible through the trees. We had paid for 2 nights. It was dark enough that driving back through unfamiliar lake roads felt more dramatic than staying. So we stayed. We set up the tent quickly. Marcy kept looking toward the lower loop where the road dipped into fog. I tried not to look because I did not want her unease to become mine. But after dinner, while I was rinsing 2 mugs at the spigot, I saw a small yellow light down by the water. A lantern. One of the lake sites had a lantern sitting on the picnic table. I told myself someone else must have checked in late. Maybe the host had only moved us because our original site had a problem, not the whole loop. Maybe there was nothing strange about it at all. Then the lantern blinked. Not flickered. Blinked. Twice, like someone had covered it with a hand and uncovered it again. Marcy saw it too. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she whispered, "That was our site, wasn't it?" I looked down at the map in my hand at the red line crossing out the lower loop. The lake site number was still visible beneath the ink. I did not sleep much that night. Nothing happened, which almost made it worse. No footsteps around the tent, no golf cart crawling past our site, no voice from the lower loop. Just the lake somewhere below us, hidden by fog, and the weak buzz of the restroom light across the road. Marcy fell asleep before I did, or at least pretended to. I stayed awake long enough to hear the last RV generator shut off. After that, the campground became so quiet that every small movement inside the tent felt too loud. By morning, I had almost talked myself out of being afraid. That is easier to do when the sun comes up. The lake looked normal through the trees. The lower loop looked empty from where we stood near the truck. The host's strange comments started turning into the kind of thing people explain away after coffee. Old man, long season, mixed up faces, bad wording. Marcy wanted to leave anyway. I told her I would go down to the office first, ask about the lower loop, and then we could decide. She did not like that, but she also did not argue. I think she wanted a normal answer as badly as I did. The office was closed when I got there. The porch light was off. The golf cart was gone. The ice freezer hummed beside the door with a handwritten sign taped to it, but there was no one around. I knocked once lightly, then felt stupid for doing it. On a small table near the door was a stack of campground maps. Same paper, same red campground logo in the corner. I took one mostly so I would have something official to compare against the map the host had given us. That was when I remembered the map in my jacket pocket. I unfolded it on the porch rail. The red circle around Site 6 was still there. So was the red line through the lower loop. But on the back in black ink, there was a note I had not seen the night before. "Don't take the lakeside again." I stared at it for so long that the words stopped looking like words. My first thought was that the host had written it. That made the most sense. It sounded like him. Careful, helpful in a way that made your stomach tighten. Then I saw the lowercase g in again. I write my G's strangely. I always have. They lean left at the bottom like I changed my mind halfway through the letter. The note had that same crooked pull, same hard pressure at the beginning of each word, same little drag at the end of the T in sight. It looked like my handwriting. Not similar, mine. I checked my pockets for my pen. It was still clipped inside my small notebook. Same black ink, same cheap hotel pen I had thrown into the console weeks earlier. I could not prove I had not written the note. That was the worst part. There was no camera on my hand, no witness, just the sick feeling of recognizing something I did not remember doing. I walked back to the campsite faster than I meant to. Marcy was already folding the sleeping bags. When she saw my face, she said, "You found it." I asked what she meant. She pointed to the map. "That note," she said. "I saw it when he handed it to you. I thought you wrote it before we came." For a second, I could not speak. The note had been there from the office. From the beginning. We packed after that. Not frantically, just with the dead focus of people who know they are done pretending. Tent down, cooler in, chairs folded. No breakfast, no second night. As I closed the tailgate, I saw the golf cart at the end of the upper loop. The host sat behind the plastic windshield, hands resting on the steering wheel. He did not drive closer. He did not wave. He only watched us from the bend in the road. When I got into the truck, he lifted one hand slightly and called out, "You're leaving earlier this time." I started the engine. Marcy whispered, "Don't answer him." I did not. As we rolled past, the host looked sadder than scared, sadder than guilty. He looked like someone watching a rerun with a different ending. Then he said almost gently, "That might be better." We did not stop until we reached town. Marcy asked me twice to keep driving past the first gas station, and I did. We ended up in the parking lot of a small grocery store with a laundromat attached to the side. It was not far from the campground, maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like another country. Cars moving, a delivery truck backing up, someone pushing a cart with a case of soda balanced underneath. Normal things. I called the campground number from the receipt in my email. A woman answered on the third ring. She sounded younger than the host, maybe in her 40s, and she introduced herself as the owner. I told her we had checked in the night before, that the camp host had moved us from the lower loop to Site 6, and that we had left early because some of the things he said made us uncomfortable. She let me finish. Then she said, "What host?" I thought she meant his name. I said I did not get it. Older man, gray hair, reflective vest, golf cart, lived near the entrance, or at least seemed to. The line went quiet. Then she said they did not have a live-in host that season. They had used one the year before, but the trailer by the entrance had been empty since spring. Online check-ins went straight through the system, and after 5, the office was closed unless she happened to be on site. I told her he had opened the office. She said no one should have been in the office. I looked at Marcy through the windshield. She was sitting on the curb with her arms folded, staring at the map in her lap. The owner asked if anything was missing. I said no. She asked if he threatened us. I said no again because that was true. He had not threatened us. He had been polite the whole time, careful, almost kind. That made it worse to explain. I told her about the lower loop, the lake site, the lantern, the note on the back of the map. When I said the words, "Don't take the lake site again," she asked me to send her a picture. I did. She called back 20 minutes later. Her voice had changed. It was still professional, but quieter. She said she had driven down to the lower loop and checked the site we had originally booked. No one had camped there overnight. No vehicle tracks, no tent marks, no receipt on the post. But there was ash in the fire ring. The fire ring was cold, she said. Old ash, maybe from a previous weekend. She kept explaining it before I asked her to, which made me think she was explaining it to herself too. Then she said there was a piece of paper in it. Most of it had burned. One corner was still readable. The only word left was "again." Marcy cried when I told her that. Not loudly. She just covered her mouth and turned away from me in the parking lot, like she was embarrassed by her own fear. We never went back. The owner refunded both nights and sent one email saying she had filed a trespass report with the county. I do not know what she told them. I do not know what there was to report. An old man who was not supposed to be there had checked us in and moved us away from the site we had booked. That sounds serious until you try to prove he existed. I kept the map. I should not have, but I did. It stayed folded in the glove box for months. Every now and then I would take it out, read the note on the back, and try to convince myself I had written it sometime and forgotten. One night, rain got into the passenger side window because the seal on my truck was bad. The map was damp when I found it the next morning. That was when I saw the circle. A red ring had bled through the paper, faint but clear, around the lake site we were supposed to take. The site the host had crossed out. The site with the lantern. the site where the owner found the burned paper. When the map dried, the circle faded until it was almost gone. But if I hold the paper near steam, it comes back. I do not know who wrote the note. I only know the map still tries to show me where we were supposed to go. The safest campsite was the one I should have avoided. I know that sounds obvious now, but it did not feel obvious when I pulled into the campground. It was late in the season, high enough in the mountains that the temperature dropped the second the sun touched the ridgeline. I could see my breath when I stepped out at the entrance board, even though the forecast had promised a mild night. I was only staying once. That was the plan. One night to clear my head before driving back down in the morning. I had camped alone before, and I was not reckless about it. The SUV had a full tank. I had a real sleeping bag, a charged phone, a paper map, and enough food for 2 days, even though I only needed one. The campground was not remote in the dramatic sense. It had numbered sites, bear boxes, fire rings, and a vault toilet near the middle loop. Half of it was closed. A chain blocked the lower loop with a yellow sign hanging from it. Seasonal closure. Another sign was posted near the upper loop, saying several sites were unavailable due to weather damage. That did not surprise me. At that elevation, winter arrived before the calendar admitted it. I checked the board, found the open sites marked in dry erase marker, and started driving slowly through the loop. The first site was too muddy. The second had a dead branch hanging over the tent pad, thick enough that I did not want to sleep under it if the wind picked up. The third was too close to the restroom, and the smell reached the road before I even stopped. The fourth had trash packed into the fire ring, wet paper plates, and a cracked plastic cup pressed into the ashes. None of that was strange. That was why I kept going. Every site had a reason to pass it, a practical reason, a reason I could explain to anyone. I was not being picky. I was making the normal little safety choices you make when you camp alone. But I started noticing things people had left behind. A blue coffee mug sat upside down on one picnic table. A single black glove lay near a bear box. At another site, a tarp had been folded once, then abandoned halfway, like someone had stopped packing in the middle of the motion and never came back to finish it. I told myself that was just late season camping. People leave things. Weather turns bad. Someone wakes up cold, throws gear into a car, and forgets a mug or a glove. There was no reason to make it into anything else. Still, I remember slowing down beside each one. Not stopping, just slowing. By the time I reached the far end of the open loop, the light had thinned to a dull blue between the trees. I was starting to think about sleeping in the SUV wherever I could park level. Then I saw the last site. Flat ground, clean fire ring, bare box beside the picnic table. Enough room to park close to where I would sleep. It looked like the only good option left. That was what I missed. Every bad site had given me a reason to keep driving. I parked before I let myself think too much about it. That is another thing I remember clearly. I did not pull in because the site felt special. I pulled in because I was tired of choosing. The light was going, the cold was getting sharper, and every other site had given me some ordinary reason to keep moving. Mud, branches, trash, smell, bad slope, too exposed, too far from the road. This one had none of that. The gravel pad was level enough that the SUV barely leaned. The picnic table sat under 2 pines that blocked the wind without hanging directly over it. The fire ring was empty except for a thin gray dusting at the bottom. The tent pad had packed dirt instead of mud. The bear box was close enough to the table that I would not have to carry the cooler far, but not so close that I would trip over it in the dark. It was exactly the kind of site you hope to find when you are alone. That should have been enough. Instead, I kept noticing how clean it was. There were no bottle caps under the table, no bits of foil in the fire ring, no cigarette butts near the parking pad, no pine needles on the bench, even though every other flat surface in the campground was covered with them. The picnic table looked like someone had wiped it down an hour before I arrived. I told myself a ranger had probably cleaned it. That was the version I needed. The campground was still technically open. Someone had marked the available sites on the board. Someone had put chains across the closed loops. So, someone could have come through earlier, cleaned the best site, and left it ready for whoever needed it. For me, I did not like that last thought, so I ignored it. I unpacked only what I needed. Sleeping bag in the back of the SUV, not a tent. Small stove on the picnic table. Cooler in the bear box. Water jug on the ground by the rear tire. I told myself I was keeping the setup simple because it was cold, but part of me already knew I wanted to be able to leave fast if I changed my mind. The bear box opened without sticking. That surprised me. Most of them fight you a little. Rusted hinges, bent latch, old food smell. This one swung open smooth and quiet. The inside was bare metal, clean enough that my flashlight reflected off the back wall. No crumbs, no claw marks, no old sticker residue, nothing. I stood there with the cooler in my hands, staring into it longer than I needed to. Then I put the cooler inside and closed the door. The latch clicked perfectly. For a while, I let that make me feel safe. I made dinner ate fast and kept glancing toward the closed loops whenever the wind moved through the trees. Nothing moved back. No footsteps, no voices, no headlights coming up the campground road. Just the site. Clean, level, quiet, like it had been held open. I remember sitting at the picnic table with my hands around a metal cup of coffee, looking at all the darker sights behind me and thinking I had made the right choice. Later, that was the part I kept coming back to. It did not feel like I had found the only good option left. It felt like the only good option had waited until I ran out of reasons to refuse it. I went back to the bear box a little after 9. The temperature had dropped hard by then, the kind of cold that makes metal sting your fingers and turns every breath into something visible. I had already decided not to set up the tent. The back of the SUV was flat enough with the seats folded, and sleeping inside meant I could leave faster in the morning. That was the explanation I gave myself. I needed my water bottle and the small bag of snacks from the cooler. I remember walking to the bear box with my headlamp on, low, trying not to look too long at the closed loops behind the site. In the dark, the chains across those roads looked thinner than they had in daylight, less like barriers, more like suggestions. The bear box opened smoothly again. Too smoothly. My cooler sat where I had left it. The grocery bag with the stove fuel was beside it. Nothing had been moved. For one second, I felt stupid for being tense. Then I saw the paper plate. It was tucked in the back right corner of the box, standing upright against the metal wall. Plain white, dry, clean. Not bent from moisture, not curled from cold, not stained by old food. It had not been there when I put the cooler in. I was sure of that. The inside of the box had been empty enough that my flashlight reflected off the back panel. I pulled the cooler out slowly. The plate stayed there. Written across it in black marker were 3 words and a time. Tomorrow, 6:40 a.m. I stood there with one hand on the cooler handle, reading it over and over like the meaning might change if I gave it more time. At first, I tried to make it smaller. Maybe a previous camper had written themselves a reminder. Maybe someone had used the plate as a note because they did not have paper. Maybe it meant checkout. Maybe it meant breakfast. Maybe it meant nothing at all. Then my headlamp caught the lower edge of the plate. There was a second line smaller, written closer to the rim. Before the box opens, I let go of the cooler. It hit the dirt harder than I meant it to, and the sound made me flinch. I looked around the site, the picnic table, the SUV, the fire ring, the dark trees beyond the closed loop. Nothing moved. No one laughed. No flashlight clicked off in the distance. That was almost worse. I checked the latch on the bear box because I needed my hands to do something. It was normal, solid, no scratch marks, no bent metal, no sign that anyone had forced it open. The plate was still inside, leaning against the back wall, like it had been placed there carefully. I did not take it. That was the first good decision I made that night. I took the cooler, my water, and the snack bag. Then I closed the bear box and made sure the latch caught. I pulled it twice, hard. It stayed shut. After that, I moved everything important into the SUV. Sleeping bag, jacket, phone charger, flashlight. keys in the cup holder not in my pocket. I told myself I would leave at first light. Driving the mountain road in the dark felt like trading one bad idea for another. There were sharp turns, patches of frost, and no shoulder in places. The truck was safer than the tent. Morning was safer than midnight. That was the decision I could live with. I set my alarm for 6. Then I climbed into the back of the SUV, locked every door, and lay there facing the bear box through the rear window. I kept telling myself it was just a plate, but I slept facing the bear box, not the trees. I woke up before the alarm. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. The inside of the SUV was dark and cold. The windows fogged white around the edges, and my sleeping bag had twisted around my legs. Then I saw the bear box through the rear glass, a black square shape beside the picnic table, and everything came back at once. The phone on the floor said 5:52 a.m., 8 minutes before the alarm, 48 minutes before the time on the plate. That should have helped. I was awake early. I could leave before whatever 6:40 was supposed to mean. If the note was a prank, I would be gone before the person who wrote it got the reaction they wanted. If it was nothing, then I would just be the kind of person who left a cold campground before sunrise and felt embarrassed about it later. I sat up slowly. Nothing moved outside. The sky had not turned light yet, but it was not fully black either. The campground had that blue-gray color that comes before dawn in the mountains when everything looks wet and unfinished. Frost covered the picnic table. Thin white lines of it ran along the edge of the fire ring. The closed loops were still hidden behind trees. I reached into the front seat and grabbed the keys. My plan was simple. Start the SUV, let the windshield clear enough to see, drive out without packing the few things I had left outside. I could replace a cheap stove and a water jug. I could not replace the feeling that something was counting down to a time I had no part in choosing. The engine turned over on the first try. The headlights came on. The bear box was open. Not wide, just enough that the front edge of the door had pulled away from the frame. A dark gap showed between the metal and the latch. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to correct the shape, waiting to realize it was only shadow. It was not. I had checked that latch twice the night before, pulled it hard, heard it catch. I remembered doing it because that was the last normal thing I had done before climbing into the SUV. Now the door sat open like someone had been careful not to make noise. I did not get out. That is important. I did not walk over there. I did not tell myself I needed to see. I did not become curious. I stayed in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and watched through the windshield. Something white stood inside the gap. The plate. It had been propped upright against the inside of the door, turned so the writing faced the road. I could not read all of it from the SUV, but the headlights caught enough. Not early enough. My foot moved before the rest of me did. I put the SUV in reverse, backed out too fast, and felt the rear tires slide on the frozen gravel. For one awful second, I thought I would hit the picnic table. Then the tires caught, and I swung toward the campground road. As I passed the table, I saw pine needles covering it. Not a few. A thick, wet layer like the site had been sitting untouched for days. The clean surface from the evening before was gone. The fire ring looked different too, darker, packed with old ash I did not remember seeing. Even the ground near the parking pad seemed rougher, marked by shallow depressions that could have been old footprints or just frozen dirt. The site looked older, used up, like it had stopped pretending once I had made the right decision too late. I drove past the restroom, past the muddy site, past the glove by the bear box at the other campsite. The chain at the closed lower loop rattled once as my headlights swept over it, though there was no wind strong enough to move it. I did not slow down. At the entrance board, I glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:17 a.m. I had left before the time on the plate. That should have made me feel like I had beaten something. It did not. The ranger station did not open until 8. I got there at 7:30 and sat in the parking lot with the heater running, watching frost melt down the windshield in thin, uneven lines. I had driven down the mountain too fast, then too slow, then fast again whenever the trees closed over the road. By the time I reached the station, my hands hurt from gripping the wheel. Part of me wanted to keep driving. That would have been easier. Go home, sleep, let the whole thing turn into a story about a creepy note in a bear box and a bad night alone in the mountains. But there was still gear at the site, and if someone was messing with campers, the rangers needed to know. That was the practical version, the version I could explain. A ranger unlocked the door a few minutes before 8. She was older, with gray hair pulled back under a cap and a radio clipped to her shoulder. I told her I had stayed at the high campground, the one with the partially closed loops, and that something had been left inside the bear box at my site. She did not look surprised. That was the first thing that bothered me. She asked which site. I told her. She typed it into the computer, then looked at me for a moment without speaking. Was there something in the bear box, she asked. I had not said bear box yet, not clearly, not enough for that question to make sense. I asked how she knew. She looked down at the keyboard and said there had been a few complaints from that part of the loop, nothing official. Mostly campers leaving early, calling later, saying someone had been at their site. By the time staff checked, there was never anything there except normal campground mess. I said there had been a plate. Her face changed then. Only slightly, but it changed. I told her about the writing. Tomorrow, 6:40. Before the box opens, not early enough. I left out the part about the site changing by morning because I did not know how to say that without sounding unstable. The ranger wrote everything down. Then she said they would send someone up to check the site when road conditions allowed. That phrase bothered me. Road conditions allowed. Like the campground was farther away than it was. Like checking it was not as simple as driving up the same road I had just come down. I asked if I should go back for my stove and water jug. She said I wouldn't. Not officially, not like an order, just quietly. So I did not. I drove home with the heater on high and both hands on the wheel. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun was out and the whole thing had started shrinking again. Fear does that when you get home. It loses shape. It becomes embarrassing. You start thinking about how much gear you left behind and whether the ranger was just humoring you. 3 days later, I cleaned out the SUV. There was mud on the passenger floor mat from my boots, empty coffee cups in the door pocket, and a granola wrapper under the seat. Normal evidence of a bad trip. I was almost grateful for it. Then I lifted the passenger floor mat. The paper plate was underneath. Dry, flat, clean. I stood there in my driveway for a long time, not touching it. The words from the bear box were gone. No tomorrow, no 6:40 at the top, no warning about the box opening. Only one line remained written across the center in black marker. You chose it. I still hate that more than the time, more than the bear box, more than the fact that the plate somehow ended up in my car. Because I remember every site I passed. The mud, the dead branch, the restroom smell, the trash in the fire ring, the glove, the half-folded tarp. All those little reasons that felt like my own judgment at the time. Maybe they were, maybe I did choose it, but it still feels like something else made every other choice worse. The worst sign was not hidden in the woods. It was clipped to our campsite post before we ever got there. I have gone over that detail more than any other part of the trip. Not the trail sign, not the map, not the road that kept sending us back. The permit tag. That thin strip of paper inside a cloudy plastic sleeve, already marked like our arrival, had been handled by someone who knew we were coming and did not need us to show up first. There were 3 of us that weekend. Me, Evan, and Mara. We had planned one night at a remote forest campground near the edge of the national forest. Nothing extreme, no backcountry permit, no long hike, just a cheap campsite, a small fire, and enough distance from work and cell towers to feel like we had gone somewhere. Evan had been there once years before, or at least he thought he had. Mara had the offline map downloaded. I had the reservation email saved on my phone because I had booked the site 2 days earlier. We reached the entrance a little before dusk. The campground board stood beside the gravel road under a leaning pine, with a self-pay box, a faded fire restriction notice, and a row of plastic sleeves holding site tags. Most of them were empty. A few had old paper curled inside. Ours was not on the board. Evan said maybe they put it at the site. That sounded reasonable. The confirmation email said, Site 9. One night, my name, my license plate, everything correct. The ranger station was 12 miles back toward the highway and already closed, so there was no point driving out just to ask why a piece of paper was missing. We had the booking. We had daylight, but not much. The practical choice was to find the site and settle in. Site 9 sat near the far bend of the campground loop. It looked better than I expected. Flat tent pad, picnic table, old bear box, fire ring with a few black stones stacked unevenly around it. The road curved close enough that the truck stayed visible from the whole site. There was one RV 2 loops away with a porch light on, but no one outside. Then Mara pointed at the post. The permit was already there. My name was printed across the top. My plate number was under it. Arrival date correct. Departure date correct. It was clipped neatly in the sleeve like any other campground tag. For about half a second I felt relieved. Then I saw the pencil mark at the bottom. Arrive before dusk. It was written in small block letters under the printed text. Evan laughed once and said efficient. Mara did not laugh. I told myself it was staff shorthand. Maybe whoever checked the site earlier had marked that we were expected before dark. Maybe they used notes like that for late arrivals. Maybe the wording sounded odd because park paperwork always sounds odd when you look at it too closely. That was what I did at the beginning. I made everything smaller. The permit did not feel like a warning yet. It felt like paperwork moving a little too fast. We tried to let the permit disappear into the rest of the work. That is what setting up camp does. It gives your hands a list of normal jobs. Unload the truck, shake out the tent, find the pole bag, move the cooler into the shade, decide where the firewood should go. Ordinary tasks make strange things feel temporary. Like if you stay busy long enough, whatever bothered you will lose interest. Mara was the one who noticed the tent pad. She had carried the tent bag over and stopped before unzipping it. At first I thought she was looking at animal tracks, so I came over with my phone light, even though the sun had not fully gone down yet. There were no tracks. There was only a clean rectangle in the dirt, not clean like swept, clean like pressure had flattened it. The pine needles were pushed to the edges in a soft border, and the middle was packed smooth, dry, and pale compared to the darker ground around it. It was exactly where we would have put the tent if we had chosen the spot ourselves. Evan said old tent mark. That was reasonable. Every campsite has them. People use the same flat ground season after season until the dirt remembers. So, we unrolled our tent over it. The corners matched. Not close. Matched. The front edge lined up with the needle border. The rear corners sat right inside the 2 shallow dents in the ground where stakes would go. Evan made a face, then shrugged, like he had decided not to hand the moment any more power than it deserved. Popular tent size, he said. Mara looked at me. I did not answer because I wanted him to be right. We staked it down, and for a while everything went back to normal again. The ERV porch light glowed through the trees. Evan opened a bag of chips on the picnic table. Mara found the little lantern and hung it from a branch. I checked the bear box mostly out of habit and put the cooler inside. The latch was stiff but working. Then Mara started clearing ash from the fire ring. She wanted to make sure there were no bottle caps or old foil before we lit anything. She used a stick to move the top layer of ash slow and careful, because the ring looked like it had not been touched in a while. A corner of paper came up with the ash, wet paper. At first, it looked like part of an old receipt. Then Evan pulled it free with 2 fingers and laid it flat on the picnic table. It was folded several times and soft enough that we were afraid to open it all the way. A map, not the campground map from the entrance board. This one was smaller, printed in black and gray with water damage blurring most of the labels. Someone had drawn over it in red marker. A single line ran from a square that might have been the campground loop toward a darker patch behind the sights. Mara said, "Trash." I nodded too fast. "Someone burned their map," I said. "Didn't finish." That explanation worked for maybe 5 minutes. Then the paper began to dry near the lantern, and more of the red line showed through. It did not look random anymore. It looked like a route. We should have thrown the map away. I know that now. We should have left it in the fire ring, or dropped it into the bear box, or folded it back into the ash and pretended we never saw it. Instead, we set it on the picnic table beside the lantern and kept glancing at it between normal things. That is how the night got under us. Not all at once, not with a scream or a figure at the edge of the trees. Just slowly, through ordinary details that started refusing to stay ordinary. The red line became clearer as the paper dried. It began at a small square that looked like our campground loop. From there, it passed behind a rectangle marked restroom, crossed a thin blue line that might have been a creek, then curved through an unlabeled part of the woods before coming back near the road. Evan leaned over it with a chip still in his hand. "That's basically what we talked about in the truck," he said. Mara looked at him. He tried to take it back immediately. I mean, not exactly. Just a short walk behind the sights. Creek loop back done. But he was right. On the drive in before we lost service, we had talked about doing a quick hike in the morning before packing up. Nothing official, no trail name, no real plan. Evan had pointed at the forest on the offline map and said there was probably an old creek path behind the campground. Mara had said we could walk 20 minutes, turn around and call it good. We had not set it outside the truck. We had not even agreed to do it. Yet the red line on the wet map looked like a version of that idea drawn by someone who already knew where our casual conversation would land. I told myself there were only so many ways to walk around a campground. Creek paths are obvious. People use the same routes. Whoever burned the map probably had the same thought. Then Mara touched a spot near the campground square. "What is that?" There was a black dot beside the road just outside Site 9, small, almost lost in the water damage. Evan tilted the lantern closer. The dot had a tiny box drawn beside it, a vehicle. It was exactly where my truck was parked. That was when Mara said we should leave. Not in the morning, not after coffee, now. I wanted to argue with her, because leaving at night felt like surrendering to something we could not explain. But I could not build a good explanation fast enough anymore. The permit, the tent pad, the map, the dot by the road. Each one alone had been small. Together they were starting to look less like coincidence and more like documentation. Evan suggested sleeping in the truck until first light. Mara said no, that settled it. We started packing without saying much. The tent was still up, but we decided to leave it for the moment and grab the expensive things first. Cooler, lantern, bags, phones, keys. We could pull the tent down last or come back for it when the headlights were aimed at the site. I folded the map because I wanted to show it to a ranger later. When I picked it up, the backside had become visible for the first time. Most of it was blank. Damp paper, gray smears, a little ash stuck near the crease. But near the bottom, a pencil line had appeared. Not that way. The words were faint, like they had been written before the paper got wet, and were only now returning as it dried. None of us had a pencil. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Evan said very softly, "We're not taking the hike." Mara answered, "I don't think that's what it means." We put the map in the glove compartment. I remember doing that because I wanted it sealed away from us. Like closing a small door could stop it from changing again. But by then the map was not warning us about somewhere we might go. It was correcting us before we went anywhere at all. We decided to leave before midnight. That was not panic, not yet. Panic would have been running into the trees or screaming at each other over the map. What we did felt practical. Evan grabbed the cooler. Mara packed the lantern and the food bag. I started pulling stakes from the tent while keeping the truck headlights on the whole site. Nobody said the word impossible. We just moved around it. The tent came down badly. One pole stuck. A corner snagged on a root. Mara finally said to leave it half folded and throw it in the bed. But when I lifted the fabric, I saw the rectangle in the dirt underneath again. Smooth, pale, perfectly shaped. For some reason, seeing that empty shape after the tent came off bothered me more than seeing it before we set up. It looked like the ground had kept our place. I shoved the tent into the truck bed without rolling it. Evan slammed the tailgate. Mara got in the back seat with the map still shut inside the glove compartment, and I started the engine before anyone had to say what we were all thinking. The campground road should have been simple. One loop, one exit. We had driven it in less than 5 minutes when we arrived. There were no side roads big enough to confuse with the entrance. The RV with the porch light should have been on our left on the way out, then the entrance board, then the gravel road, back to the highway. We passed the restroom first, then Site 4, then the restroom again. Evan leaned forward between the seats. Did we turn? I said no. Mara said, keep going. So I did. The site number stopped behaving after that. Site 7 came after Site 3. Then Site 11. Then Site 6 with no RV, no porch light, no sound. At one empty site, the permit sleeve was flipped backward against the post, and for 1 second the headlights caught my last name written on the paper inside. I did not stop. The road widened near a place I did not remember. A fork appeared ahead, one side dropping left, the other curving right through denser trees. There had not been a fork when we came in. I know people say that when they are scared. I know memory edits roads, but all three of us saw it and none of us recognized it. Evan checked the offline map. The blue dot spun slowly in the middle of a blank green patch. Right, he said. Right looks wider. I took right. For maybe 3 minutes it felt like we had made the correct choice. The road smoothed out, the trees opened, the truck tracks and the gravel pointed the same direction we were going. Then the headlights landed on our picnic table. Site 9. Our fire ring was still smoking. The bear box was closed. The permit sleeve shone faintly on the post. And the tent we had thrown into the truck bed in a twisted wet pile stood on the pad again, fully pitched. Lantern hanging from the same branch. Front flap zipped shut. No one spoke. I did not get out. That might be the only reason I can still defend the rest of that night. I did not step out to check the tent. I did not tell myself I needed proof. I kept the engine running, put the truck in reverse, and backed away from the site until the road widened enough to turn around. Mara started crying silently in the back seat. Evan kept saying no, no, no under his breath, like repetition could make the campsite obey him. As I turned the truck, the headlights swept past the bear box and caught something behind it. Not a person, not an animal, just a narrow opening between the cedars darker than the trees around it. A trail entrance. It had not been visible before, or it had been there the whole time, and the site had only now decided we were ready to see it. The campsite was not stopping us from leaving. It was putting itself back together every time we tried. We did not take the trail. I need that to be clear. None of us walked into the woods to see where it went. None of us followed the opening behind the bear box. By that point, curiosity was gone. Whatever had been normal in us had been stripped down to one instruction: leave. I turned away from Site 9 and drove back toward the fork. Evan kept the offline map open even though the blue dot had stopped pretending to know where we were. Mara held her phone against the back window, recording through the glass. I remember the red recording light reflected in the rearview mirror. It made me angry in a stupid way, like the phone was too calm about all of it. The fork was gone. The road where it had been now curved in one direction, only downhill between trees so close that the branches brushed both sides of the truck. I followed it because downhill still meant something. Roads do not usually climb forever. Water runs down. Traffic is lower. People build exits where land allows them to. That was the last simple logic we had. Then the headlights found the sign. It stood between two cedar trees at the edge of the road, not at a trailhead exactly, but close enough to look placed there. Dark wet wood, white carved letters, one side bent inward toward the trees. Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles. Mara said, that's not on the map. Evan checked anyway. It was not there. The campground map showed no Laurel Creek Loop. The paper map from the fire ring, the one sealed in the glove compartment, had no printed name there either. Just blank woods behind the site, and a creek line that should have been farther north. I did not stop the truck at first. I rolled past it slowly, close enough that the passenger mirror almost lined up with the bent edge. The right side of the sign curved inward without splintering. There was a thin crack under the word loop, pale against the dark wood. Evan whispered, "Keep going." I tried. 20 feet past the sign, a fallen branch blocked the road. Not a huge tree, not something dramatic. Just a wet limb lying across the narrowest part of the track, thick enough that driving over it could catch under the axle. I stopped because I had to. Backing up would send us towards Site 9 again. Going forward meant moving the branch. Evan said he would do it. Mara told him not to. He said, "Then we sit here." Nobody had a better answer. He opened his door, but left it wide, one hand still on the frame. I kept the truck in drive with my foot on the brake. Mara kept recording. Evan moved fast, staying in the headlights, never more than a few steps from the bumper. He grabbed the branch and pulled it sideways. It scraped across the gravel with a wet sound. That was when my headlights shifted across the back of the sign. For just a second, the beam caught a mark on the rear lower corner. A small X. The bottom line dragged too far down, like the blade had slipped. I did not understand why that detail made me colder than the rest. I had never seen that sign before. I had no reason to know what should or should not be on the back of it, but the mark looked less like vandalism than recognition, like someone had checked that sign once and left proof for themselves. Evan got back in and slammed the door. "Go," he said. Mara looked down at the phone in her hand. Her face changed. What I asked. She did not answer. She opened the glove compartment and pulled out the damp map from the fire ring. The red line on it had spread, or changed, or maybe it had only finished drying. I do not know. But there was a new mark near the blank woods behind Site 9, a small red slash exactly where the sign stood. Under it in pencil were 4 words. "You missed it at first." Not the first time, just first. None of us knew what that meant. I drove over the spot where the branch had been and did not look back until the sign disappeared behind the trees. We did not take the trail. I still think that mattered. I just do not know if it helped. We reached the main road sometime before dawn. I do not know the exact time because none of us looked at the dashboard until we were already under the gas station lights. That is how I remember the escape, if that is even the right word. Not as relief. Just fluorescent light on concrete. Mara sitting on the curb with her phone in both hands. Evan walking around the truck again and again, checking the tires. The bed, the tailgate, like a loose strap or a branch caught underneath, could explain the entire night. The tent was in the truck bed, not packed well, not dry, but there. That almost broke me. I had seen it standing at Site 9 after we threw it in the back. All 3 of us had. The poles were still half locked, the fabric twisted around them, and pine needles were stuck to the corners from the tent pad. It looked exactly like something we had torn down in a hurry. Mara played the video at the gas station. Most of it was useless. Reflections on glass, her breathing, the dark road behind us. Then the footage showed Evan moving the branch in the headlights. The sign stood behind him for a few seconds, clear enough to read the white letters. Laurel Creek Loop, 1.8 miles. When the beam swung as he dragged the branch, the back of the sign flashed into view. The X was there for one frame. Small, low, crooked. Then the audio cut into a hard, static pop, and the next 30 seconds had no sound at all. We waited until the ranger station opened. The man behind the desk looked at our reservation email, then at the campground name, then at us. He did not act like we were crazy. That was somehow worse. He said the campground was still open for late season use, but the trail system behind it had been closed and partially removed years earlier after a washout. Mara asked about Laurel Creek Loop. He paused. Then he said there was no Laurel Creek Loop at that campground. Not closed, not renamed, no record of it. I showed him the video. He watched it once without speaking. Then he asked me to email it to the district office. His voice stayed calm, but he did not watch it a second time. He also did not ask us to return to the campground to identify the sign. He only said a maintenance crew would check the area when they could. When they could. That was the same careful distance people use when they know a place is close on paper and far in every way that matters. We left after that. For a few hours, nothing else happened. That is important. We drove home. Mara slept part of the way. Evan did not. I kept my phone on the console with the reservation email open because I wanted one thing from the trip to stay fixed. At 2:13 p.m., the cancellation came through. Reservation canceled before arrival. Full refund issued. I stared at it in my driveway, reading the sentence until the words stopped behaving. The process time was listed underneath. Tuesday, 4:08 p.m., 2 hours before I booked the site. I checked my bank statement. I checked the original confirmation. I checked the timestamp on the email from the night I made the reservation. It did not matter. The cancellation record said the trip had been ended before I created it. Evan told me to delete the emails. Mara said never to send the video anywhere else. I kept both. I also kept the map from the fire ring. It dried completely over the next week, stiff and wrinkled with ash pressed into the fold lines. The red route changed less after that, or maybe I stopped checking it every hour. But one night, while trying to flatten it under a stack of books, I noticed the old creases did not match the way we had folded it. So I folded it along the original lines. The red route connected. Entrance board, Site 9, restroom, creek, bent sign, back to the entrance board, then Site 9 again. There was no line leading out to the highway, no exit road, no break in the loop. The part that stays with me is not that the reservation was canceled. It is that the system says it happened before I made it. The map says we never had a way out. And the sign in Mara's video is still there for one clear frame pointing to a trail that does not exist. We were not being warned away from the campground. We were being shown the version of the trip that had already happened. The worst part is not knowing what was out there. It is knowing the warnings were already in place. A fire ring that remembered too much. A permit that had already been used. A sign that should not have existed. A road that repeated itself. A campsite that made every other choice feel worse. Maybe none of them were warnings. Maybe they were leftovers. And if the next campground already has your name on the post before you arrive, do not assume the mistake is in the paperwork.